And here we are. Welcome back to Engaging India at Almedalen Future Urbanisms, organized within the umbrella of Future Urbanisms, which is a multidisciplinary program of Uppsala University at Campus Gotland in collaboration with Zerocity and Content People AB. The seminar series has been focusing this Almedalen week on fostering cooperation, collaboration, and connections between Swedish and Indian innovation and sustainability stakeholders. And of course, discussing various key concepts through various key stakeholders from the research, thought leadership community, from the industry, academia, as well as policy. Now, when we talk about sustainability, there are numerous factors that are interconnected and spoken about almost in the same breath. And we have been, through the series of seminars from this morning, discussing various facets of sustainability, of innovation, of cooperation, and co-thinking towards a better planet and a better life for the people and communities. But there are also other concepts of climate action when we're talking about sustainability, of lowering the carbon footprint, of lowering carbon emissions, circularity. What is overconsumption? How does one strike a balance in how much we produce and consume? And it's also about making an industry transition. So this seminar will focus and showcase these aspects of industry transition, of circularity, of what does zero really mean, and of what does it mean to strike a balance. Now, this particular seminar, which is the culminating seminar of this whole seminar series, Engaging India at Almedalen Future Urbanisms, will also showcase and formally introduce Zerocity, which is a collaborative platform to create sustainable solutions for cities, community, and the economy. So it is my pleasure to introduce all of you all, our guests today. Let me start with Dr. Gucci Mette, the head of the Secretariat of the Leadership Group for Industry Transition. She's also a research fellow at the Stockholm Environment Institute. The Leadership Group of Industry Transition, as we know, is jointly co-held with India and Sweden. I'd also like to introduce Shalan Tandon, who's the Vice President at the Chairman's Office of Reliance Industries Limited, the biggest perhaps enterprise from India. Also on the panel is Dr. Swaminathan Ramanathan, researcher at the Uppsala University and the curator of Zerocity, as well as director in sustainability and social impact at Deloitte India. And Professor Uwe Ronstrom with the Uppsala University has done some tremendous work as an ethnologist on sustainability, on sustainable destinations, as well as on various aspects of sustainability that we will be hearing from him today. He's also the co-organizer of the series. Professor Uwe, let me start with you. This seminar focuses on merging the concepts, the Indian concept of Sunya or zero, which is for those here in Sweden, it is about circularity. That's what Sunya indicates, with the Swedish concept of Lagom or balance. So we are trying to explore in this seminar the question that how can India and Sweden lead the way to a more sustainable planet? And what do these words really mean? What does Lagom mean? And how does it tie in with sustainability?
Thank you, Rupali, and welcome to you all. Also, let me start by just introducing a few things that came up from the previous seminars. We heard one of the employees of the Swedish Embassy in India, Per-Arne Wikström, speaking about key aspects of what he saw as similarities. What can India learn from Sweden and vice versa? Or actually, what are the similarities already there between India and Sweden that could promote a future collaborations? And he said three things that I found important. One is that what he finds is a similarity in how we approach or view our presence on the planet here. That's what he calls an ecological sensitivity, which comes with our being in the society and so on. I think that's very interesting. And also he says that important, he finds important both in India and Sweden the notion of reciprocity. Reciprocity is not everywhere important, but maybe in certain areas of the world, as in Sweden maybe, and then India, that's also an interesting aspect. And also the third one, he says that it's the very big emphasis in both societies on infrastructure, on building infrastructures, and he finds that from his perspective. And I think that is interesting. That's especially, all of these are interesting. And I will continue with saying something about building infrastructures, which I think is also from Henrik Johansson in one of the seminars. He's the founder of a company called Spaudi, which works on solar powered water pumps. He spoke very engagingly. He spoke about the necessity of economic rationality behind what people does, and he says that if people cannot see what's in it for them, they will not do it. Still, himself, what came through, it's his own engagement was not too much about economic rationality, but rather of a certain ethos, a rationality that comes from another source, just doing good things, making the world a little better. So that came through, which is sort of an other rationality. So both throughout, we have this two sides speaking sometimes to each other. Also, Ram Dwivedi from Praveg Dynamics, a company in India, he spoke also interestingly around what he called the invest to consume less. That would be in one way economic irrationality, if you want to say that. But there's also an ethos behind that, which is very interesting to contemplate on. Now, the ethos, I come back to that now, because whatever sustainability is or will be, it requires a transition from where we are now. Transition is about change, but it's not any kind of change. While transformation and change are overall generic terms, transition actually implies moving from something to something other that we have already some idea about, that we can grasp, foresee, and project our hopes and dreams on and strive for. So transition is by default a greater challenge than just change. And anyway, since change is the basic universal principle behind just everything in the world, so it will anyway occur, whatever we do. But transition is different. It's a different kind of process, a process of controlled change in specific predetermined directions, and with outcomes that can be and perhaps must be measured in some way, evaluated in some way on the basis of some common yardstick. And language is a big part of that, of course, and philosophy and moral and ethics is a big part of that. Thus, transition to sustainability is a challenge ahead of us that requires new thinking and innovation in all areas. We spoke about energy systems, we have spoken about water, food supply, transport systems, urbanization, climate, health, economy, and much more have been brought up during these three seminars. But transition also requires a meta language or a meta way to understand what the experience and relate to all this as a totality, to which is of course the systems that we call culture and society. And to come back to one of the speakers also, we need who said that we might need a technology for a creative cognitive infrastructure that can enable us to pioneer the possible, as Per-Arne Wikström expressed it. A language that is sort of a meta language, and that is not constructing the silos which many of us pointed to, which actually not doing very good to us, the silos and pipeline thinking. No, that an infrastructure that to connect is what we need. Words and concepts that can make us to give shape and form to what is necessarily in front of us. Words that can stand for and contribute to transition when it comes to how we as humans will relate to each other and to the world around us. And now coming back to what you said, Rupali, looking around for such words, which we have, of course, we as researchers are doing all the time, words that could facilitate that a transition to a sustainable future, perhaps. And we need words with the capacity to both express and produce a certain relationship to the world. Now, the Swedish word lagom pops up. It's a word that means, it's an adverb. It's an adverb used for just enough, not too little, not too much. It's also a worn word in Sweden nowadays, often used negatively as a synonym maybe to mediocre, indifferent, gray, even dull. But however, it is also widely and since long used as a synonym to modesty, moderation, and balance. As such, it has become a generic caption for a certain less is more ethos that is often said to characterize Scandinavian culture, and also said to be a founding principle of Scandinavian societies as a whole, and not least Sweden. That may be true or not, and whether this is an accurate description or not can be debated. But my point here is that we already have words and concepts around us that may help to both express and produce a more balanced relationship to the outside world. Words that can show the way to a more sustainable thinking about the world and about being in the world. So lagom might be exactly just one of those words. And also, I just to end up here by getting back to Najir. Let me see now. Where did I put it? There, yeah. Sorry. Jain. He said, who pointed that several times. He pointed in his address here in one of the seminars that we already have access to the building blocks that many of them that we need. They are already here. We just don't know how to use it. And that's the whole point. Lagom is already there. We might need to use these words, these kind of concepts and ideas that are already as building blocks for an ethos that will make us think differently and make us think in a direction that will enable a transition to a more sustainable world. Now, Swami, please take over.
Thank you. Thank you, Uwe. I think that was a very interesting introduction. And what I'll pick up from your excellent exposition is the word transition, and try and build upon that, so that we lead to a more concrete discussion with Gucce and Shalin. So if one has to look at transition from the perspective of a change and a change management, then there are two ways of looking at it. One can either go ahead and look at transition from a change management perspective, saying that we don't really know how to make that change, or we don't know how to sort of lead that change. The other way, which Uwe, that you've very nicely pointed out, is the fact that the mental models for making that transition towards a more sustainable economy, and this is sustainable world, is already there in many ways. So it's not just in terms of the various building blocks that Neeraj Jain from Deloitte was referring to in the first conversation today, in terms of the fact that your technology solutions are already available. What one needs is the ability to orchestrate these different kinds of technology solutions, put it together, so that you're able to build something that is a little more, that's far more ecologically friendly. And I think that's where a lot of the transition terminologies come from, because transition means change management. So if one has to sort of go back to what you were saying, Uwe, in terms of Lagom, The way I would like to put it is the fact that sometimes you end up rummaging in the attic of your home and you get something old or slightly older, and then you realize that it's something that is very, very useful even today. And that's precisely what we are doing, saying that how do we go about building a new language today that doesn't necessarily come from a new way of building a word, but that comes from a place which we've already been, or which our parents had been, or which our grandfathers and grandmothers have been. And that's where both Shunya and Lagom come from. And for me, it sort of connects directly to transition. One is that we are in a place where we are today talking about transition, both from an industry transition perspective and an energy transition perspective, simply because of the fact that we've come to a realization, either through evidence or through a certain awareness, collective awareness, saying that we can't continue like this anymore. We are destroying the world, we are destroying the planet, we are destroying communities, we are destroying groups. That's one part of the realization for transition and change management. The second part of the realization comes from the fact that now that we've realized that, how do we go about getting ourselves to change? And when we talk about industry transition or an energy transition, it's as much about going ahead and looking at it from an outside in and saying that, oh, that's industry and that's energy, but it's also about going ahead and saying that it directly connects to our life and the way we live. So if we have to go ahead and look at it from that perspective, and if we have to go back to what Neeraj was saying, Neeraj Jain was saying that the building blocks are there, and what the Indian ambassador in his opening address was saying, that one needs to look at it from a civilizational perspective, because once you start looking at a problem from a civilizational perspective, you realize that there are a lot of mental models that are already available that could be used today. Then, in many ways, what we are saying is that the transition has to be circular, because that's how we had lived all together. And that is where the concept of shunya or zero comes in. So it's not just a number or a numerical representation of zero, but it's also a way of life that is circular. And if one starts looking at zero from the point of view of circularity, then one needs to go ahead and one is at a crossroad, right? Should we start talking about zero only from the point of view of a philosophy and a certain approach and a central mental model? Or should we start looking at zero and Lagom as balance as part of a new software that we need to develop for society? So if, say, for instance, there is a open source, open standards, open protocol, plug and play modules available, which we can put together in terms of creating a digital public infrastructure, UPI, Aadhaar, Bheem, as far as the Indian context is concerned, Swish in the Swedish context, or Bank ED in the Swedish concept, is also a digital public infrastructure. Can you then go ahead and create a transitional software or a software for transition as a societal code that actually hard codes both Lagom and Shunya as a software solution? And that's where I think a lot of this thought process for Zerocity as a network and as a way of looking at life comes in. Maybe Rupali, with your permission, I'll sort of hand over the mic to Dr. Goche, because I think she is at the forefront of industry transition, and I would love to hear more from Dr. Goche. Over to you, Dr. Goche.
Thanks a lot, everyone. It's really a pleasure to be here. I suppose I'll come from a different perspective and talk a little bit about how I have personally experienced since I've joined Lead It shortly after it has been established. Indeed, it is an initiative, and I'll give a bit of a background. It is an initiative led by India and Sweden. And similarities that we have seen in the context of industry transition is around how sort of partnership has been a tool for fostering industry transition, and the way we have sort of convened different stakeholders and created buy-in. So Lead It is an initiative under the United Nations Climate Action Initiative. So we are one of the initiatives. There's one on energy, there's one on maritime, there's one on transport. So industry is one of them. And this one is led by India and Sweden only. And Stockholm Environment Institute, where I am also employed located and also who's my employer, hosts this initiative. And we bring together now and collectively around 36, I suppose, or 34 maybe today, stakeholders. So that means we bring together companies and countries around the world that are from all over the world. So we have Korea, Argentina in the group, several European countries, and heavy industries, especially from cement and steel sectors. They are, of course, at the forefront of the industry decarbonization. These are difficult industries to, of course, decarbonize, and the cost and the sort of size of the decarbonization efforts are quite large, and they have to be shared between public and private sector. In this group, we gather together once a month between all the stakeholders, and we each year we have a leaded summit, and that's where we make the major decisions, and the group collectively actually not only decides on how they will work together to raise ambition on industrial transition, but also how we will set the agenda, global agenda on industry transition. And we have had influence on sort of the G7 decarbonization agenda, United Nations, UNIDO, and Clean Energy Ministerial as well, their work on industrial transition. So we're very connected. And India and Sweden, they are collectively at the management board of this initiative, which means together with World Economic Forum, they take decisions on like sort of day-to-day management of the initiative. And one thing we've identified in our work is that one of the measures to sort of accelerate industry transition is through roadmaps. So in Sweden, we have the Fossil Free Sweden initiative that might be known to some of you. What Sweden did is quite, I think, interesting, because they brought together 22 sectors. They set the target, and they said, 2045, we will be net zero. So how can you get there? So through dialogue for each sector, from these 22 sectors, they were able to create sort of a common language and identify the infrastructure, energy needs of industries to get there, and what the industry can do, and also whether they can do it and how they can do it, how both parties sort of can support each other. So you set a target, and then you have this sort of consensus building and buy-in. And I think that has changed a lot. Sweden is leading on green steel. There are also several initiatives on cement. And now I know also this sort of road mapping process is also quite suitable for India. So as leaded secretariat, we are engaging with in institutions to see how we can sort of replicate and share lessons learned from that. So common language and common understanding and all those things you mentioned today about societal aspects, these are very helpful in sort of passing on these lessons learned and being able to learn from each other's experience. And the group collectively, by showing leadership, they share their experience with all the other countries. So it's a great platform that I'm very happy to sort of share with you some of the sort of achievements, but the roadmaps being kind of central to our work today. I guess I'll stop here, but I'm really keen to receiving some questions in the discussion part.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Goche. Rupali, if you may allow me, I had something that I found very interesting in the way Dr. Goche was talking about. And so one of the key aspects, Shalin, that I would like to bring you here. You are someone who's worn many hats and still wear many hats. You're part of a large company in India. Everybody knows about Reliance Industries Limited. But more than that, you are a venture capitalist fund of your own right. You invest in companies. You have, how do I say, in stealth mode, several software startups that you are looking at. And you also have, you are also someone who are extremely well connected at the ground level. You understand the reality at the ground level, having been directly connected with some of the work that is happening in some of the most marginalized and vulnerable areas in India. Now, considering that you're wearing these multiple hats, so the question that I had in mind was something that Dr. Goche brought about, saying that one of the key aspects of lead IT is the way they are convening different stakeholders. And you seem to be occupying that stakeholder space as one single person going at different levels. So how do you see that convening going ahead and helping some of these industry transition kind of challenges, especially since I know that you did something in terms of the milk procurement and looking at a local community business model that seemed to work very well. So maybe your perspective on local community stakeholder participation for business models at the ground level, which could benefit everyone, but at the same time be friendly, ecologically friendly.
Thank you, Swami. Thank you to the panelists as well. I'm very glad to be here. It's a very interesting conversation that's going on, which merges in between a little bit of philosophy, a little bit of the ethos, in between the two countries, the two concepts of Lagom and Sunya. And we seem to feel very familiar in such conversations, because I think as we are growing in India over the years, there has been a very strong realization that one needs to be attached to the fundamentals. And when you look at a holistic picture of any nation, it needs to start at the bottom level, to the stakeholders at a community level. And yes, I have been part of a number of initiatives where I've had the perspective and I've had the opportunity of learning through those journeys. And I can specifically give you one example about the farmer community from a milk perspective, and how it helps really bring a perspective of why it's important to an industry as well. It's very easy to be able to start a farmer collaborative business. However, to try and bring in a community feel to it and a circularity to it, or a balance to it, you must have something you're giving back to the society. You must make life easier for them. You must make life easier for yourself. Only then do you bring a commonality in between them and what you are doing to be able to save the ecosystem, save the business, save them from doing what they're doing. And one of the efforts that we had done was that we not only connected with the farmers who were the providers of milk, but we connected them to technology. And the technology was simple, it was available, it just had to be utilized. We brought in the materials to be able to allow them to congregate milk in smaller sections. So there would be 10 farmers coming into a certain location. It would have the electronics to allow them to measure their milk quality. We would have a GSM-based online cloud-based system that would tell them exactly the quantity of milk. So there's transparency that's coming in, because I would hold back that information only if I had a vested interest, but that was not the intention. And finally, when the milk gets processed, they know exactly what is the quality they are delivering, what is being accepted by the market. It gives them an opportunity to work better, to be able to perform, because it directly impacts them, their income, and there's transparency in the system. While we're talking about a community effort to try and bring people together, everyone then becomes more conscious also because of the animals. The marketing becomes automatic. People start respecting the farmer and the effort that they're putting in. The food supply is going in for the animals, the support systems that start incubating by themselves, because there is transparency to that information. And then ultimately the consumer benefits and the farmer benefits. And that's when there is a balance in what the business is. So this was just an example to try and tell you it can be done at any level. And I believe that India is in that mode. because when people like us are looking at that, we may not be individual in our approach. There are others who are trying the same approach at community levels. I'm aware of friends and family who've been doing a lot of work in conservation in smaller villages to make them model cities or model villages in order to be able to get them the water balance, get them the electricity balance using solar, try and get food production balances so that the dependency from the exterior is a lot lesser. And these are just smaller models that will bring about the change for replication as you grow larger. And like all the other members have also mentioned, the country is doing their bit. The country is also contributing a lot in the ideation, the roadmaps, the ability to create the right infrastructure. And everyone needs to take over that responsibility at some level to be able to participate in that journey. Only then is that transformational change really going to happen. So I mean, that's just a little perspective that yes, this is real. This is not in talks. It's actually being implemented. People believe in this, and it's coming in very rapidly. Not all of it is documented. Not all of it is well structured. But I am quite certain that once you have a platform, what you're attempting to be able to get everyone onto, that will become a reality, because the recognition for that, the transparency towards that by itself is going to create a lot more value to the society.
That's really interesting, Shalan. And I am going to get in Dr. Goche back into this debate as well, on it, especially when you are talking about the transition and looking at achieving industry transition. Dr. Goche, there are many elements when we talk about transition, and we have Professor Uwe, Swaminathan, and all of you all have been talking about different aspects of it, right, and integrating it. Now, but it's also about operationalizing it and creating a common language, really. So how do we set up these standards, especially under different contexts and across borders? And I believe that is something which y'all are also working with at the moment at the Secretariat of Industry Transition.
Yes, thanks a lot indeed. So I guess we need to create a common language. So when we talk about sort of green steel, green cement that is covering a lot of media attention and at the sort of height of, let's say, next frontier in climate mitigation discussions, and we need to find a way to define what green steel means in India, in Sweden, in Germany, Australia. So it depends on, of course, the energy inputs and how we produce steel. There are different pathways of decarbonizing steel. You can decarbonize it with direct reduction of iron, with the use of hydrogen, as we're seeing in north of Sweden. There are two initiatives, hybrid and H2 green steel. And then you also have electrification options with blast furnaces. But then, of course, there's green hydrogen, there's less green hydrogen, depends also how you produce hydrogen, how much CO2 is there. These are difficult questions, and within the group of Lead It, we focus on a lot of course, these are the technical details. We focus also a lot about how do we create markets for green steel, who's going to buy it, because there's a premium. Of course, this is not, hydrogen is expensive, the change of the whole process is expensive, so your end product has a premium, so who's going to pay for that premium is a big question. But then at the same time, we come back to the standards, because if I'm going to buy green steel, I want to know that, what is it produced of. So we need sort of labeling, certification. So we always get stuck on this kind of more standardization, common language issues. So these are super important to develop. At least we are, of course, not a standardization body. It's for ISO and for other organizations to do. And European Union is, for instance, working on standards themselves. I know there are discussions in Australia to certify hydrogen differently. Then we might end up in a world that, as we have this different standards, they don't necessarily tell the same story. So we need to have sort of a joint approach, an international approach. Therefore, we are working quite closely with the UNIDO. So their industry transition team are also convening together kind of stakeholders to define them. So there's work, there's awareness, but it's a long process. Just to tell you one thing, that's like one ISO standard, it takes about 9 years to develop one certification. So now they're also working on carbon neutrality standards. So it's a very long journey, but we must keep that in mind, and we must keep that in mind that these products are globally traded, and we have to work on it together. So LEAD creates a platform to raise awareness and sort of share lessons and hopefully make progress in this area.
Yeah. And also, when one does talk about industry transition, it's also, we are talking about large industries as well, right? And largely large industry. And there needs to be a paradigm shift really in the way the industries think and the way large enterprises think. Shalin, we did hear news of, in fact, Reliance, one of the largest industry in India, enterprise in India, making a commitment towards cleaner energy systems, towards energy transition. How much do you think the industries need to accelerate this shift now across the world?
So from an India perspective, I think Mr. Ambani has been a transformational leader for this country ever since he's been part of the industry. And year after year, he's been a visionary in order to be able to help the country as well as create societal value. And I think one of the initiatives that you're hearing about now, which is about clean energy, is something that is very close to his heart and he's very passionate about. And when he puts his mind with the teams that he's built over time, I think the change is coming, and the change is going to be big. So it will be a force to reckon with, and it will allow for the rest of the countries and other stakeholders to participate in, which is by itself the transformational change that is beginning.
Interesting. And I think Professor Uwe also has a point to make here. Professor Uwe? Your mic, please.
Yes, I would like to come to a point here, transition of industry, and this example, Shalin, you mentioned from India, when you spoke about starting with the local stakeholders and the local communities, and then we come to like the cement industry as another example Gökçe brought up. Then we approach also the very important problem of, you could call it the problem of levels. While on one level, often the local level, it's repetition is the key. You repeat. Nothing is accumulated. You drink the water every day, and very little is actually accumulated. But on the other level, a water industry is accumulated. An industry that accumulates money and power and things like that. So it is important to realize that the difference, the conceptual and also difference in every aspect between these levels. So when you start with a local, it's not, it doesn't come just by chance, doesn't come immediately that it also affects the other levels, because the difference of accumulation is so different. Well, how could you approach that? How do you see that? I would ask Shalin, from your example, how could you snap up this idea of starting local, of this local stakeholders and community, and get into other levels?
So my understanding or my experience tells me is that try to make small changes. You're right. The changes are different at different levels. However, when you begin with repetitive change at a particular level, the motive of a local or anybody working with any commodity, even in a repetitive form, is desire to be able to grow to another level. What is it that you're doing in order to be able to allow them to change that repetition in a manner that they can grow to the next level? So when you go to a farmer level, they have one cow that gives an X amount of milk daily. They need to be able to do the manual labor to get that milk to a particular point. And you're right, that's a repetitive process. However, with the repetitive process over time, the quality of milk that they are actually producing, because the societal effort is also involved in feeding the cow better water, more medicinal support, allows them to be able to earn a little more. And when they earn a little more, that spend goes towards a better quality of life rather than a wasteful effort from them. That's when they're pushing themselves to another level. And the same you would do at every different level. So the aggregator who's collecting the milk would also want to get to a point that they can become a larger aggregator. And likewise, the industry, while they are working on aggregating thousands of farmers to be able to produce a product, they would like to complete the circle by giving back to the farmers so that they are able to continue that in a sustainable manner in order to grow to the next level. So these are very small steps, and you're absolutely right. Every level has to do their bit to get to the next level. Only then does it make a societal difference. And it is possible. Yes, it takes time. It takes a little bit of effort and a lot of education at every level. So you need to continuously repeat that there is value being created beyond your business or beyond the money. And that's what makes the change.
Thank you. Thank you. If I may, I would like to continue with another and asking, also coming back to what Jörg just said about requiring roadmaps, or the idea of a roadmap for the future. And coming back to the cement industry, we are in Gotland, where the cement, the whole island is almost the whole island is limestone. So cement industry has been important here all the time, throughout 1,000 years or more. And now it's a major, the biggest industry, cement industry in the northern hemisphere is situated here in Gotland. However, and the industry has a roadmap to become more sustainable, but through producing even more cement or limestone. But the stakeholders, the local communities, may have a totally different roadmap, including water, because the water becomes a problem then. So you might end up, like here in Gotland, with colliding roadmaps, where the local roadmap leads to a sustainability in one sector, and the other level roadmap leads to sustainability in another sector, and they don't go together at all, like here. And this will probably become a major conflict in Gotlandic society if the plans to the new cement industry comes out. It will be affect everybody's water consumption, is my guess. So how do you see that? How do you actually cope with negotiating these kind of issues?
It's not really, of course, directly my experience, because with LEADER, we really bring together leaders from countries and companies, and it's, as we mentioned before, quite a high-level gathering. But I suppose the good thing about fossil-free Sweden experience is that this has to be, the whole road mapping experience has to be facilitated by an independent organization that is not the government, that is not the private sector, that is not the consumer association. So that should be the way to sort of being able to convene different perspectives without having favoring businesses. So I'm not sure. I haven't checked the sort of water implications, but independent facilitation is crucial. Of course, communication is crucial, but then also we need to see how. So each time when we do a roadmap, we don't go and create completely a new way of sustainability pathway. It needs to take into account the efficiencies to be gained, also the circularity aspect, so that we don't lose sight of resource efficiency. So the roadmaps for cement sector, so to speak, they quite often look at, of course, substitution, so using not limestone perhaps, but other kind of binding agents to be able to reduce the CO2 impact and also resource efficiency. But at the same time, they quite often focus on the energy inputs, like also sort of carbon capture and storage is a technology option. So I suppose when perhaps this is exactly one of the lessons to be learned for India or other countries that are starting a road mapping process, that resource efficiency and sort of this linkages between different different sustainability priorities are balanced. And we have a work, and I also am participating at the UN high-level dialogue on energy. And there we look at, I'm at the section that looks at how different SDGs reinforce or actually pose barriers to each other. And it's really difficult to track and implement and trace. It's a complex area that we are all trying to find a way to conciliate and find a solution.
Yeah. So yes, you're right. Balancing sustainability priorities, you said, would be that the cement industry would need to be Lagom, and then also the stakeholders, they need to be Lagom, and so it comes back to this again, to the ethos of it all.
Well, very nicely put, Professor Uwe. And I'm also going to bring in Dr. Swaminathan on circularity and on the concept of Sunya. When we are talking about an industry transition, when we are talking about an energy transition, when we are talking about achieving sustainable development goals, we are talking about a better planet for the people and for communities. There is a lot of talk on circularity and also on looking at zero carbon, or at least a net zero, not a zero, but a net zero. How does this really tie in with what y'all are doing as far as Zerocity goes? And how do you tie in Lagom and circularity? The different transitions that are taking place currently, the different strings that people are working with, and how does it all come together for Zerocity?
Thanks, Rupali. I think that's a very interesting question, and it's also a question which is quite complex in its own right. What I'll try and do is maybe I'll try and pick up a few of the threads that has been brought about by Professor Uwe, Shalin, and Dr. Goche, and then weave it together to let everyone know the complexity of the problem that we are solving, right? One is this whole concept of net zero or sustainability as we understand it today, right? Net zero is a little more definitive than sustainability, but if you go ahead and ask anyone today saying that what is the definition of sustainability, right? We don't have a shared common definition of sustainability. Similarly, once you go down to net zero, it is a little more scientific because you can go ahead and measure greenhouse gas emissions and then get a carbon footprint. But that in itself will then makes it very reductionist and just one-dimensional. And that is where I think a lot of the net zero targets, so to speak, needs to take into account the context from which these targets are being positioned. So what could be a net zero target for a particular country may not necessarily be a net zero target for some other country. Right. So that's the second point that comes to mind. The third point that I think Shalin brought about very well is the fact that there is no substitute to going ahead and doing the kind of stakeholder capitalism that Shalin talked about, wherein he said that, in the milk model, and I have had some insight into the milk model because I was working with Shalin at that particular point in time. The amount of time and effort that Shalin and the team and everyone put in terms of actually aligning the different stakeholders within a local community, in the longer run, help that particular model to succeed. So in many ways, as Shalin said, that you have to go ahead and first of all establish the value of what you're doing to that local community, and you have to show them a pathway. So Goche talked about a roadmap. So one is the roadmap of transition, but there is also a roadmap at the community level that needs to be shown to them, and that is what's going to go ahead and align both the roadmaps. And I think that is precisely what the whole idea of Zerocity is. Can we get to a place where different stakeholders are aligned, not just at a definitional level, right? Everybody seems to broadly agree what sustainability is, but at the level, the alignment is at the level of roadmaps, in the sense that everyone is on the same journey, more or less the same journey, and they're all part of the same ecosystem, which essentially means that you can be part of the same ecosystem only when there is a Indian concept, or the Indian thought process understands it better. The whole idea of giving, the whole idea of taking someone along, the whole idea of going ahead and giving something to someone who is not that privileged. That's something that has been there in the Indian civilizational context for a long period of time. The sensitivity and the awareness to go ahead and be extremely frugal about what you're doing, reusing something, it's all there in the Indian ecosystem and Indian thought process. So in many ways, what I'm trying to bring to the table is just one single point. We have the technological solutions, we have the digital software, we have our thought processes more or less sorted out, we have our mental models sorted out. Can we now get to a place where sustainability becomes a societal code? And I'm using the word code very, very consciously. I'm not saying language, I'm saying societal code. In the way today you have Linux and Red Hat and different kinds of software as an open source software. Can Zero become the C and the C++ equivalent of the new society that we want to go ahead and build? Can Lagom becomes the C and the C++ of the new software societal code that we want to go ahead and develop? And that again brings back to the question that end of the day, you might have all the technology solutions coming in, but if you truly want to go ahead and give legs to stakeholder capitalism, to dynamic materiality, to the whole concept of value accounting, to the effort that WEF and IBC, in which Reliance also plays a major part, in terms of going ahead and standardizing all the metrics and the measures so that everyone's going ahead and talking about the same thing. That cannot be brought about till you don't involve the stakeholders, and the stakeholders by default will involve the community. So you have to create some sort of a value at the community level. The last point that I would like to bring to the table is that the question is always remains that how do you move from net zero sustainability from a post facto end state, right? If you look at sustainability reporting of any company today at this particular point in time, it's almost like an annual report. At the end of it, there is a corporate sustainability report or a sustainability reporting. And then the measures and the metrics are so different and the language is so different that it almost becomes like an end. It becomes like a thesis at the end of your studies. There is no real time understanding of how you achieving sustainability. And again, the point that I would like to bring to the table is that it is not rocket science in many ways. There is something that we could even adopt from the total quality management. Today, quality is not seen as an end state. Quality is seen as a continuous process of improvement. Now, if quality is a continuous process of improvement, and there is a certain expectation that the stakeholders bring to the table of saying that what is acceptable quality, then there has to be a certain framework that allows to turn sustainability and net zero not as an ideal end state, but as a continuous process of improvement so that it becomes part of KPIs of companies, of institutions, of people, of different kinds of governance bodies that are bringing to the table, that are out there. So I'll stop here, Rupali. So I think it's a long answer to something that has been there in my head for a long period of time. So thank you for asking that question. And back to you.
Thanks, Dr. Swaminathan. We also have questions coming in from the audience, and we have a very interesting set of audience, both from India and Sweden, and I guess from other parts of the world as well. But I'm going to pick up some of these questions that have been coming in, and whoever would like to ask, please raise your hand digitally or sort of physically. One of them is that, can sustainability be the main key driver of innovation in technology? And if so, would it be profitable? Who would like to take that? Charlene, I'm going to, okay, Professor Uwe.
Let me start. I'm not an economist, but profitable could be also other things than economy, of course. To just answer it in a very possibly roundabout way, we are doing things here in Campus Gotland, Uppsala University. We are educating, we have a course, a master course in sustainable destination development. So what is the point of that? The point of that is not to study destinations, just to say something about their destination, but to actually interfere in and turn destinations into more sustainable through these studies, which will make them more profitable. So there is no you can, profitability is part of sustainability and must be. And profitability not only in economical terms, but also, like Swami and also Charlene said, we are also in many other ways. Profitability should also mean moral, ethics, life stance, and so on. So yes, at all those levels, my answer would be yes.
Yeah, I'm also going to get in Dr. Goche into this. Perhaps this is something, Dr. Goche, that you all also are looking at handling, or perhaps even grappling with, that if industries are to make a transition towards a more sustainable way of functioning and towards reaching the goals of net zero and towards climate action. It also, profitability is an important factor for the industry as well. So how do you kind of factor in these various layers to facilitate or to nudge this industry transition?
Thank you so much. It's a very good question, and I was quite curious when I also sort of started working on industry transition. I didn't quite understand what was the motivation of companies, because it was clearly more expensive to start producing. I know initially there were bags and bags of or containers of green cement somewhere sitting and nobody would buy it. But then I figured out, and then I was wondering, perhaps it is the companies, they just want to be sustainable. It's part of their will to do good, but of course it's also not alone the case. So industry transition, companies are investing, and we're tracking green steel investments. We're going to start tracking also, if we can find the right data, also cement investments for decarbonizing cement. So we have a green steel tracker. You can find it on www.industrytransition.org. We have a green steel tracker. So we've tracked them, and there's a huge amount of investment going into these sectors, and they do so because there's business case. The companies invest because there is profitability. The profitability is maybe not now, but it is in the near future, especially with the rising carbon price, with the new proposed carbon border adjustments. More countries talking about carbon clubs. So the price of carbon, high carbon, is really making especially kind of forward thinker, progressive companies realize that if they do not produce this carbon neutral or low carbon products today, they'll be out of the game tomorrow. It's true for many sectors, but certainly for the cement and steel sectors. So they go hand in hand. For sure, companies want to do good, but I've soon found out that there's business case.
I did see Dr. Swaminathan as well raising his hand. I'm going to bring you in, Swaminathan, on what if you wanted to add to that question.
Yeah, so I think it's a very interesting question and something which has many layers to it in its own way. So there are a few things that I'm not really sure as to whether I'm not really sure whether it really helps in the longer run. So if one has to go ahead and look at what Rosling talked about factfulness and looking at fact for as is rather than building something, over engineering something or over designing something, right? Just for the sake of going ahead and making it appear to be robust, right? There is one piece of statistic that came from an internal study from at Deloitte that we did in 2019 and 2020, where we found that over 95% of the Fortune 500 companies across the world file a sustainability report because of directly to an SEC or an Indian equivalent of an SEC, right? And it is not just in the developed countries. 100 of the top companies in 52 other countries that we surveyed, 80% of those companies had a sustainability report. And we did an analysis of saying that how is the sustainability report over the last 5 years evolved, and it's become more and more specific. There are more metrics involved in it, right? But if you actually bring it down and look at a baseline, saying that has all these sustainability reports led to less emissions or a carbon footprint, taken together at an aggregate level, the data actually indicates a hockey stick. For the total number of sustainability reports that have been filed, your carbon footprint has actually increased. So it's almost as if there is a gap between how we are looking at sustainability and reporting it and taking it from a process, taking it as an end state perspective, and from what is it that we are doing for, which again brings back to the question that Shalin said, that it has to make sense to the stakeholders. One, two, for it to make sense to the stakeholders, you need the information to be open and transparent. That is number two. Three, we have all treated data as something that needs to be captured in very, very specific ways and hard code it in an Excel sheet or hard code it in a database server, MySQL database server. That's the, at least in my mind, that's the old analog style of going ahead and collecting a data. It's almost post facto. It's like a post-mortem, right? But there is another way in which data can be collected, and that is what is called as data as exhaust. You're not going ahead and collecting data for the sake of collecting data. You're not going ahead and having a monitoring framework or a reporting framework for the sake of going ahead and finding out what is happening. The process itself is so digitalized that every single process has a sensor driven manner in which the data is automatically generated and collected. So no one's going ahead and manually trying to collect the data. The process itself incorporates sustainability. So if, say, for instance, there is a process within a company in order to produce a particular product or a service, can sustainability be hard coded into the process? Like the way, for instance, quality is hard coded for total quality management. So today, people talk about the Toyota way because quality has been embedded in every single aspect of their process, right from their recruitment, right from shop floor management, right from the way they source the raw material, quality control in terms of how many micron, millimeters, etc. Can the same philosophy be brought in for sustainability, right? And that in itself is the new digital way of looking at sustainability, because today the technology is there. Today you already have 5G and you're moving towards 6G, which means that Internet of Things, machine learning, artificial intelligence algorithm, edge computing, as they say, the sensors are getting closer and closer to us. So the whole idea here is that can we start looking at sustainability and zero from the perspective of how some of the other companies have gone ahead and created their business model. And Airbnb today is not a company that goes ahead and puts a Rupali with a Swami just because we have excess house today. And Airbnb is able to create that model simply because of the fact that they've been able to digitize trust. Uber is able to create the taxi service model because they've been able to digitize location. I don't see too much of an issue in trying to digitize sustainability in the same way. And once we digitize that, some of the things that Shalin brought about, or Dr. Goche has been talking about in terms of stakeholder capitalism, value investing and value accounting, transparency, information, and on a real-time basis, all of that then becomes important and direct, and it impacts your life. So there is no either there is no information lag wherein you have to wait for a year in order to find out whether a company has done enough on sustainability or not. There is enough information that is available to a Rupali, to a Shalin, to an Uwe, to a Dr. Goche right now to say that should I pick up that packet of coffee or not, because you know whether the coffee has been sourced in the right manner or not, right? And it is something of an exhaust. So there aren't big organizations like ESG rating agencies of today, for instance, which are going ahead and creating their own frameworks and trying to look for sustainability funding. And I think the last point that I would like to bring to the table is that it's already happening because you have GIS, GPS, location tracing today. So one of the cutting edge project is Climate Trace. And if you look at Climate Trace, the way they are going ahead and looking at GHG emissions at source, at location, without really building a massive reporting infrastructure, is the way forward.
That's really interesting, Dr. Swaminathan. And if somebody would like to add to that, perhaps we can afford about a minute or so. Go ahead, Professor Uwe.
Yes, we have to also understand that in the same way as we spoke about earlier, like 10, 20 years ago, when studying globalization processes and localization processes, the processes is going between. We learned that, which is, I think, the same here, that for things to become localized, to become available at the local level and really work at a local level, that you need heavy infrastructures like huge motorways, very large scale motorways to make things available at the local level. So on the one hand, while things are being becoming localized and becoming available, accessible to everybody at the stakeholder level, the necessity is to build an infrastructure that is far beyond any stakeholder, any local. And that's what we may be looking at, because as some of the previous speakers said, that maybe a model is the way email works, because I can send you, any one of you, an email independent of the platform you use. I don't need to bother with the platform you use. I can stick to the platform I use, and then it will pass on through. So it's a sort of a meta infrastructure, but it's a protocol that is it's one of the world's most impressive motorways in that sense, that will bring things, make them available, accessible locally. So what Swami says, coming back to what Swami says here, is that we might need to build an infrastructure that allows diversity, that makes this world safe for diversity, for the diversity that is already out there. But through that, to make that happen, we need to make the most non-diverse infrastructure, perhaps, which is well, that it might work. We are anyway heading that direction in many aspects.
Yeah.
So, yeah, this is full of contradictions, but this is again the problem of levels, or the issue of levels.
That's interesting, Professor Uwe. And I also did see Shalin raise his hand. Shalin, very quickly, we have about just a few minutes, and we also have a closing address by His Excellency, the Ambassador of Sweden to India. So, but I'll take a quick few words from you before that.
I I have one thought that I would leave everyone with, and everyone's approach is different, which is what makes it interesting and what is going to bring about the change. But one of the biggest stakeholders across all industries are the millennials. And if you look at a lot of reports, the way they have actually put them in, the thought that comes in from one of the ENY reports of 2016 is that the millennial investors have a general tendency for investing based on their personal values. And the most important factor that we need to notice is this is a key development, because as currently that we see, the current millennials are going to be transitioning a wealth of $30 trillion that they are going to make a difference with. How can we make them use this money right is what's going to be the change that we'll be able to participate in. So I hope that brings about Lagom and Sunya together in the right way that we are all attempting to be able to bring to.
Dr. Kochi, any final words that you would like to say on the panel?
I just want to say I really learned so much more, and it's great to have this sort of also cross-sectoral learning opportunity. So I think we should. It's great, and I live with a lesson learned for us to engage more with other sectors, and also to be able to compare kind of smaller size enterprise challenges with that of the large industries.
Yeah, I guess that also ties in with what Professor Uwe was saying about different levels, also different layers. But at this point of time, and that's a debate which Professor Uwe, we would love to hear about beyond Almedalen Week as well. Though at this point of time, I would like to thank Sweden's ambassador to India, Mr. Claes Molin, as well. He did come forward to give the closing address at Engaging India at Almedalen 2021 Future Urbanisms on Sweden-India cooperation, especially on sustainability, on innovation, on jointly being at the helm of leadership of industry transition. Let's hear it from the ambassador.
Thank you, Rupali. President Shankar, Ambassador Lal, dear participants, thank you for asking me to say a few words at the end of what I hope has been a very, very useful and constructive seminar. It's always a pleasure to address Swedish-Indian cooperation in any field. But on innovation, I feel we have made more progress, perhaps, than in any other sector in recent years. Ever since the signing of the Innovation Partnership for a Sustainable Future a few years ago, we have jointly funded, jointly supported a number of calls in very important areas. And this work continues unabated and very, very strongly. Two other recent and very important examples where Sweden and India are cooperating at the moment is both the LEADIT, the Leadership Group for Industry Transition, where Sweden and India have co-chaired, co-led an initiative which is seeing growing numbers of members, both governments as well as companies, who are looking to transform their production into more sustainable ways. For instance, very heavy polluting industries such as cement and steel are two very good examples, as well as the very well-known Indian initiative, Indian-French initiative, the International Solar Alliance, which Sweden was very happy to join in recent months. So there's lots going on. There's certainly much more in the future. Thank you very much for asking me to be part of this. It's a virtual Almedalen this year. I hope that we'll be able to see each other in place and in Gotland next year. Thank you and good luck.
So the ambassador, I believe, is also watching this. So a quick note that we would love to have you at next year's Engaging India at Almedalen Future Urbanisms as well. Thank you for sending us your closing address. We will wrap it with that. It has been an extremely engaging conversation. from the morning with a variety of speakers, a very, very interesting mix, multi-stakeholdership, multi-perspectives in the truest sense between India and Sweden. And it also ties in with the theme that we are looking at, that what can India and Sweden really learn from each other in this changing world. With that, I would also, before in fact I end, I'd also like to thank the entire team. We do have Rahul Kishore Kumar, who's joining us at the back end. So a lot of the messages that you see are from him. A lot of the social media posts and the creatives that you see are from Hitaishi Dayanand. She's joined us. Our producer, Kapil Sikka. Thank you so much. And of course, a big thanks to the audience for being a part of this conversation, for sending in your questions, and for encouraging us to have more such conversations. Thank you.
Yes, and thank you, Rupali, for leading these conversations so graciously. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
There, I think we are now not online anymore. So